slides up here. We'll get those back up and running. And we should be talking about democratic theory. So last week we were almost through with this slide. We talked about 1, 2, and 3, but I wanted to give anybody an opportunity that had maybe been reviewing their notes or looking over anything to ask any questions before we get started today. It's certainly okay if you don't have any questions, but I just thought that I'd put that out there, and before we get started, you get a chance to catch up if something was a little off. Okay. All right. Well, let's pick up and keep moving then. So what we're talking about here are the traditional democratic ideas, or that underlie theory of how this works in the 50 United States and the U.S. as a whole. Right, that if for democracy to be functional, these 5 things are typically what we try to build into the system. And we've talked about equality in voting. We've talked about those folks that are eligible to participate having a chance to make a real difference. We've talked about the need for individuals to be able to engage in communication without any kind of hindrance from the state. Right, so these things, right, are the first 3 of the general principles here that we're talking about. The last 2 we're going to talk about on this today, before we move on, is citizen control of the agenda and inclusion. Now, citizen control of the agenda is pretty straightforward. We should be able, if we are arguing that we have a functional democracy, to be able to trace what our government is focused on. Remember, we talked about a policy agenda. What are the list of ideas that and topics that our government's focused on? We should be able to trace back from that to actual citizens saying this is important and the government needs to do this, right? We should be able to see politicians or prospective politicians running for office talking about the important issues that they're going to address. We should see that talk and those ideas being a reflection of what their constituents are asking for. We should see then bills in the Texas legislature, right, being put forth to try to address those very issues that come from the constituents through the elected representatives. And then the government, right, the state government actually working on that. Now, citizen control of the agenda does not entail or imply that they will always be decisions that the citizens want, right? We're not going to say that it translates over into a direct political result every time, but we should see, if it's a functioning democracy, we should see that the citizens have the ability to get their issues in front of government and discussed by government. So it's a pretty simple idea, pretty straightforward, and it's kind of, right, a way of right, stress testing the government to see if it's doing the job it's supposed to be doing. Does that make sense? The 5th item here is inclusion, and this is one that we have an issue with. It's difficult for us to keep this in place all the time, and the idea of inclusion is that all of us as participants in government, all of us as citizens of the state, right, are treated the same under the law, that we're given the same rights, by the law and we get to exercise them to the same extent, and that we are subject to the regulations and penalties of law, and that we are held to the same standard regardless of who we are. And this is a challenge, right? Every democracy faces this challenge. And some are a little better at it than others, but all of us, from state to state and country to country that claim to be democratic in nature, this is a challenge, because in a real sense, democracy is setting up values that go against, right, the idea of democracy. One, right, it's a decision-making process where the majority controls what the decisions are and how those are implemented. And at the same time, we're trying to protect minority rights, right, so that everybody can stay involved and have a voice. And we're expecting those that are in the majority to apply the rules the same to everyone, even though we generally think that humans are self-interested and won't do that. And we're expecting that everyone's going to be held responsible to the same laws. And it's just not necessarily human nature for most people to say, yes, I did wrong and I should be punished. And so it's more normal for people to try to explain their way out of it and not get punished. But inclusion requires that if you break the law, you pay the price, and that everybody pays the same price. And that if you're trying to participate in the system, that the system is providing an equal, open opportunity to you, regardless of who you are, right, to participate and to affect the government and to affect law. And so, that's just a great ideal. It's just a very difficult one to always do well at supporting and providing. So we shouldn't have any problem, right, coming up with examples of when the law wasn't applied the same to people, when people weren't given the same opportunities under law that other people were given, right? Our history is replete with examples of where we've fallen short of inclusion. But for democracy to be successful, this has to be an ideal that is continually being strived to be met, right? We have to continually work on this. We have to be not excluding people. We have to ensure that the doors of the democracy are open to people being able to vote, and being able to speak, and being able to get involved. And anytime that we start seeing the system, where we seeing part of the system try to exclude people that, right, meet the proper criteria for participation, in other words, they're citizens, they're residents, right, of Texas, then all of us should be getting very much upset about this, and we should be putting our attention to it to ensure, right, that their ability to participate is protected, because that's kind of the base of how democracy is supposed to work, is that we all get that one vote, and that vote means the same. And if we start, right, shading off on inclusion, well, then we're obviously taking votes away from people that should be able to cast them and to make their impact felt. So this is number 5, is, right, that ideal that's out there that democracy needs to be meeting, and it's also one of our stiffest challenges in staying an effective democracy. Any questions that make sense before we move on? So Ruben asked, do I believe that citizens today do indeed control the agenda? I would have to say that we do, right? So there are many, many different opportunities for us to control the agenda. And so there's a two-step process to this for me when I look at it. Are the opportunities there for us to get involved? And then the second step is, are we stepping through and taking advantage of those opportunities? And I would say, when you look at Texas, the opportunities are just amazing for us to get involved and to have impact into what the government's going to be paying attention to. Whether we take advantage of that and step through and try to do it, that's probably the bigger challenge to us, right? Is that most of us either assume that we can't or aren't willing to put forth the effort to get involved. And so when we as citizens don't step up to do that, those folks that we've elected are there, and that's their job, and they're going to do what they want to do. Now, most of the time, if you sit down and evaluate a politician on the promises that they made to get elected, right? You elect me and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And then you evaluate their performance when they're in office and did they try to do X, Y, and Z, you'll find a very high level of continuity between what they promised and what they did, right? If I remember my numbers correctly, candidates for office generally fulfill their promise to try to do what they say they will do. Now, remember, this is not a guarantee that it will get done, right? In a democracy, one person can't say, I promise this will happen, and know that it will actually happen. So we evaluate politicians on what they say they will work on or try to get done, and do they then work on and try to get that done? Not necessarily are they successful, although that could be part of the equation if you wanted it to. And I believe that most candidates for office that get elected and become office holders, 90% of the time try to do what they promised they would do, right? So that means that they're holding themselves accountable to their constituents, right? Their constituents were wanting some things. They promised they would do those things if they got elected. And 9 times out of 10, when we look back, we can see them trying to do exactly what they said they were. So in that sense, I would say, as citizens, if we stay engaged and we elect the people that represent what we want, yes, in that sense, we can control the agenda just through the election. But more so are all the opportunities that we as individuals have in Texas to actually get involved ourselves, right? Without even actually running for office, right? But just as a citizen, right? The opportunities we have to contact legislators and participate in committee hearings and be present during the legislative session to keep track of what government is doing, because Texas puts all of this on the internet for us and we can pay attention to it. And then the ability to organize and to protest, and right, all of those are fairly well protected in Texas as actions, and they're effective. So I think the answer is yes. We do indeed control the agenda when we put our hearts and minds into trying to control it. Most of us don't, right? We let others do it. So it's a very small percentage of people that are actually standing out there trying to do these things. And in that sense, they're more apt to be successful than the rest of us that are sitting back and watching. All right. Did I address that well enough for you, Ruben? That makes sense, or is there other questions? All right, thank you. We'll move forward. So we've got these big goals, right? These ideas that democracy looks this way, and these things happen. What we don't talk about is the assumptions of how we keep this democracy working over time. And I say these are assumptions because we kind of know them, and we expect them to be there, but we don't question whether they are or not. And so, I haven't tried this, but there is an option in here for me to hold polls within this Blackboard, and I haven't tried to do that yet, and I don't know how well that works. But if I were to hold a poll, right? If I were to ask you a question, ask you to all vote, maybe we can try that, right? I'll give you a yes or no poll. The question is, do you think Texas legislature is effective. Now, you may not have any idea about whether it is or not, and it doesn't really matter what the answer is, right? So pick an answer. I'm going to start the poll. Y'all can start responding, right? And so we're holding a poll here, right? And at the end of this poll, right, y'all are going to click yes or you're going to click no, that the legislature is effective or it's not effective. And it's going to show us, right? So start clicking, right? It's going to start showing us the results. It's not going to show who says what, right? It's just going to, it's not letting you click. Oh no. Don't want to end the poll. All right, we'll clear it. We'll start again. See, this is why, whoops, don't click that. We don't want to do those. I haven't tried this before, but we thought we'd give it a run, right? Texas legislature effective. Your answers are yes or no. Let's see if we can get this to working. We got 2 votes last time. There's 3. No, yes, no. Okay, so the poll's working. We're seeing results. And at the end of this, we're going to get an answer, right, from what this class as a whole thinks, right? We'll get a majority that says one thing and a minority that says the other, right? And so this is useful because, one, we know, right, that anytime you have, right, especially a binary situation like this, that you're going to get some answers, right? And you're going to get a majority position and a minority position. And this slide is looking at majority and minority from that perspective, right? Majority means those folks that are in the bigger group, and minority means those folks that are in the smaller group. And most of the time in the Texas democracy, that translates to parties, right? The majority is one party, the minority is the other party. And so, so we got 3 of you here that either have not responded or cannot respond. And y'all gonna we got somebody there that's right, not sure. Play in with the results. So you 3 folks that haven't voted, right? Y'all are the swing votes, right? You're gonna make the difference here one way or the other on where we go with this. I'm gonna put a stop to it. Right, there we go. Our final was 14-10, right? I think in that poll. So what we saw there was we got a majority of 14 that said no and a minority of 10 that said yes, right? About that question. So the majority there, right, is going to give us our position that the government's going to be acting on. The minority is the contrary voice. Now, what you saw there in that kind of yes/no poll was that everybody's vote was equal, right? Well, you got 24, 25, some 27 of you, and everybody had the opportunity to vote, and each vote counted the same, right? And that's kind of the idea here. Right. So the assumption that underlies that kind of polling situation is that one, we have that one person, one vote, and those votes are equal, and that the decision, right, of where we as a group go forward as a legislature or whatever, when we're making a decision, is going to fall to the majority. Right, 50% plus one more vote is going to be the majority, and they're going to rule. In other words, they're going to win on that issue. So that's the assumption that underlies all the democracies in the U.S., right, including the U.S., is that majority rule makes those decisions on individual issues within a legislature for the government, right? And that's the way it works in Texas and in most states, in most cases. Now, there'll be a few scenarios where the decision is so important that we require a supermajority rule, right? Where we'll say, 50% plus one's not enough. We need 66% or we need 75% to vote yes for us to make this change or to implement this process. And usually those are those higher supermajority requirements are laid out in the rules or in the constitutions telling us when we're going to use them. And the rest of the time, it's tied to a majority rule. So the assumption is that we're going to let the majority make the decisions. And that's what a poll like that works. So, and you're right, Jalen. What matters individually certainly impacts how people vote and whether they vote one way or the other. And so in that sense, it becomes both personal or idiosyncratic, right? In the sense that you look at it from one person to one person to one person. But we also lump things together by having people, right, organized behind a political party. And so a lot of times people will start to identify with the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or the Green Party or the Libertarian Party, and an issue will come along that they're not really committed to one way or the other. They'll go with their party. Or we even have instances of people saying, well, I believe X, but my party really wants to do Y. And maybe as an individual, I'm just not seeing all of it. I'll go with the group as a whole. People will sometimes, go against their own stated interest and stay with a group. And so we need to be aware that all of this is happening underneath that you're pointing out, Jalen, that, right, these individual preferences matter. These individual needs to belong to a group and to work with a group matter. The group as a whole kind of might take on its own perspective going forward as a group. And all of this impacts who the majority is and what the majority is going to do. And so in Texas, we generally see that right through the parties working its way through on each individual issue. But you will see members of parties, right? Sometimes, right, it'll be a personal issue that will come up that will move them to side with the other party or on the other side of the issue. Or maybe their constituents will have said, right, hey, we're all Democrats, but we want to vote in our district. We think this is important to vote this way, which happens to be, right, corresponding to the Republican. And you'll see a Democrat vote Republican or a Republican vote Democrat because they're representing the folks that elected them. And so we have to look at both individual motivations and the group motivations. But again, we don't really even question that the decision, that it's the right way to make a decision in these democracies is usually by just a majority result, right? Most of the time, we all go, okay, well, that side of the issue got 50% plus one, so that's the way we're going, right? Which talks to a basic belief that groups that have, more people in them or a higher participation rate of people committed to them, we generally think that, individuals using common sense and organizing as a group is a perfectly fine way to make decisions. Can the majority be wrong? Absolutely. And I think most everybody recognizes that just because you've got the biggest group of people on one side of an issue doesn't mean they're making the best decision. But they are making the decision that democratically most of us can get behind. And we've assumed and support this decision-making rule. The second one here is tied in really tightly with this, and this is minority rights. Again, when we were doing the poll, right, the side that got the most votes I referred to them as the majority. The side that got the least votes I referred to as the minority. And that's the group we're talking about here, is the group that tends to get the least amount of support is the minority. So the rights that are protected and exist for the minority are rights that allow them to keep participating in democracy. What we don't want to let happen, what will kill a democracy faster than just about anything else, is if the majority uses their power as the majority to make decisions that systematically prevent the minority from playing a role in government, right? When the majority uses their decision-making power to keep the other groups and other folks that are in the minority from participating, they've slaughtered democracy, right? So the idea here is that minority rights is an obligation that exists upon the majority to protect them, to protect those folks' ability, those folks that are in the minority, their ability to stay in the discussion, to keep voting, to be able to have a say and a vote and a voice, right, in the democratic process. Because that's the only way that we can allow change to happen, right, is to allow the minority to stay involved. At any time when the majority group begins to ostracize, to kick out, to marginalize those that are not in the majority from participating in the system, you've got a real problem, and your democracy's on the edge of collapsing into some kind of group-focused authoritarian system, and we don't want that, right? We don't want that. We want to keep that door open so that people can come in with different ideas and different perspectives and different goals, and have the floor and talk about it and try to change people's minds. Now they may not be successful, and that's fine, right? There's no guarantee from the majority that the minority is going to be able to change hearts and minds. The guarantee here is to keep that floor open for them, that platform open for them, so they can at least get in there and say their piece and have that opportunity. So that's what we're talking about between majority rule and minority rights. We're going to make the rules with the majority vote, and we're going to try to ensure that the minority always has the opportunity to participate. The third thing is that under our Republican form of democracy, that we're going to have true representation, which was what Ruben was asking about earlier, right? Do we have this? He was asking, do I believe we actually have real representation, that they have control of the agenda? And obviously, right, the answer to that from my perspective earlier and now is yes. I think that representation in the Republican form of government is functional. It is not perfect. And we see, especially from number two, we see challenges to minority rights, right, and their ability to effectively participate quite often. And we have to be, right, vigilant in protecting those, and because if it falls apart, representation is gone, right? If minority rights are not protected to participate, and majority is doing whatever majority wants to and running roughshod over the discussion and the opportunity for other folks to be involved, then we certainly don't have representation of all of those that are in the minority. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we wouldn't even have representation from some of those in the majority, right? Those folks that are in the majority group that went along with it because that's what their group wants to do, even if they didn't get what they wanted, right? They're not getting represented well either, right? And so in a sense, you want to make sure that this platform to speak out and to speak for change exists not just for the opposition groups, but also within your party, within your majority group, right? And I think that we even have that, right? If you look at the state parties in Texas, especially the two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, when they have their conventions and they bring, right, delegates in from across the state to meet in the Democratic State Convention or the Republican State Convention, and they're trying to hammer out what it means to be a Democrat in Texas and what it means to be a Republican in Texas, they're going to have in-depth discussions and debates over particular issues, right? Which means that there are going to be Republicans there, right, disagreeing with each other over certain issues. They don't all think the same. But at the end of the day, they're going to use majority rule within their party to say, here's what our party believes as we go forward, right? And those Republicans that didn't get the issues the way they wanted have to decide, do I stay with my party even though I wanted this and didn't get it, or do I step out and maybe go somewhere else, right? And so that's always a real conversation. Are you getting representation by your government? Are you getting representation within your group? can that representation through either majority or minority participation make an impact and change the agenda of government and what government's focusing on? Questions? All right, so we've talked about what it means to have a Republican democracy. That's kind of the 5 ideas behind it. We've talked about the 3 assumptions underlying how that democracy works in Texas. Here are the things that have to be protected over time, right? That if these are the conditions of democracy, and if these are not there, if you can look out into Texas and say one of these 4 things is missing, then you have to question the effectiveness of our democracy, and even up to the point of questioning, do we still have a democracy? So the first one, right, we've talked about in different ways, but political equality is that vote, one person, one vote. We see some challenges every now and then to this in Texas, right? We've seen it with voter ID laws. We've seen it with polling place reductions. We've seen it with challenges to how long we can vote or how long the voting period is. All of those can be challenges to political equality if we're not careful. And so we have to make sure that when we make changes to the way we participate in elections, the way that we draw districts, political districts, and how we gerrymander them, that gerrymandering doesn't injure, right, identifiable groups in the area. So political equality is something that we need to keep foremost in our mind to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. Second condition is non-tyranny, and tyranny. Do I have slides on these? I do have slides on these. I should use the slides, right? So there's your slide on political equality, one person, one vote, right? Each vote counts the same. And I've got in here this idea of the definition of a person expanding over time, and that's just a recognition that historically the extension of one person, one vote was to a small group of people, right? And legally and improperly, we excluded a whole lot of other folks, right, from being able to participate politically. Historically in Texas and historically in the United States, we have been getting better at this. And the definition of a person, right, legally that gets to participate in the political system has become, right, broader, has encompassed more people. And we're getting pretty good at it as where we're at today, right? So today in Texas, what are the qualifications for a person to be able to vote in Texas? Do anybody know? If you want to go vote in an election, what do you have to meet as far as a qualification? 18-year-old resident. Anything else?
18-year-old United States citizen.
Registered.
Yeah.
Yep.
Registered.
So that's, we have in law that you have to have some type of photo ID. There's a timeline on that residency, right? But so these are pretty good, right? I mean, these aren't. Sometimes it might be we might have some discussion over the efficiency of being able to get a photo ID and the cost of being able to get a photo ID, and that might carry some issues with it. But this is pretty broad now, right? This is a pretty expanded definition of who's going to be able to participate, right? You've got a couple, you got to be a certain age, you got to be, right, a resident, and you got to be able to be registered in a proper fashion so that we can identify who you are and that you're voting. That's not too restrictive in most cases, right? If you just go back, right, a little bit, you'll see, right, that we used to, right, you used to be looking at it from the national perspective. When we started off, you had to be a free white property owning male of a certain age and citizenship, which, right, effectively cut out most people from being able to participate. So we're getting better here, right? We're getting better here, and that's a good thing, right? So to move on the non-tyranny part, which is where I was going on this, is that, right, a lot of times as government is passing law, this, Texas government is saying, okay, here's a new law, here's what we're trying to fix, here's what we're going to regulate. We have to make sure that as they pass that law and they put those regulations into place, that those regulations don't become tyrannical in their reach or their impact. And what that means is that the liberties that we are guaranteed as citizens of Texas are not restricted by the law that is being passed by our government today. So in Texas, right, we have the same general rights and privileges that we have as a U.S. citizen. We have all of those. And then we actually have a few other Okay, so I think you can hear me. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, can
Okay, I'm
Brandon.
able to get video working right now. So you won't see my uh, picture down in the bottom if you were seeing that, but uh, we can at least talk. All right, Robert, what does not quiet mean? I'm sorry, Ruben. Oh, that library is not fake, Samantha. That is my actual library. Um, it is a background because my office is not in my library, but that is my actual library. Actually, if I showed you what the background, the real background is in my office, it would be a little disheartening. Um, so it's still a work in progress, but no, that is the library that when I'm just reading, I go in, and that's where all my books are. So that's a real picture. Yes, you would be unimpressed if you saw the background of my office. I've got one little uh, pukey bookcase with nothing in it and stuff on the floor, so it's kind of ugly. Not all of the rooms are up to snuff yet, but the library looks good, so that's why I'm using the background. um, okay, so we've got looks like a good number of you are still connected. It might be that a hangover from before, and but we'll get back at this a little bit. And I don't think even the recording is working. Okay, so Andrew can't even hear me. So maybe we're still having some serious issues. Yeah, it says it was on my end, and yet it's not actually doing it. So let's see if we can't get some of this. If we start it over, maybe we'll get a little closer to getting it to work. So the sharing is working. It keeps giving me the option to start the recording, but it's not. I'm not getting the recording, and I'm still not able to put video up. Okay, so we will. We will assume that it is recording, and if it's not, then we'll try to address it to individuals later. But we'll move on because we've got some time. Unfortunately, I think we're losing some of you, right? Andrew, can you hear me? Okay, so yeah, so he's having done. Having some technical difficulties, and I'm thinking this is still all probably server side issues. Davin, what's the? I mean, I know Discord is a grouping server that lets you communicate, but how's Discord? Are you trying to run a Discord link off of this or a Discord session off of this? Okay, so Andrew's getting. Oh, Vern set up a Discord link. Okay, is that working clearly? Okay, so there's. Do you get voice through the Discord, or is it? So could you post that again, Vern, and maybe Andrew can jump over to that. All right, so let's hope that everybody's paying attention to the chat window here and is picking up on what Vern is doing for us. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And let's move forward and talk about non-tyranny. We're experiencing the tyranny of electronics right now, right? Because it's infringing upon our rights to freedom of speech. Uh, but nevertheless, the idea here is that government is, by its very nature, when it's making law, is making regulations, and it's going to try to restrict some behavior and uh, reward or approve other behavior. And those behaviors, whether we're restricting them or restricting them or being positive toward them, can impact our freedoms that are supposed to be guaranteed to us, regardless of government action going forward. And so we have to keep an eye on what government is doing to ensure that the new policies they're putting in place aren't going to restrict the fundamental rights that we have as citizens and as people. And so at any time where we start passing new legislative law or we start passing rules, administrative law, we start changing the norms of political practice. We start ignoring maybe constitutional uh, uh, design. Uh, at that point, right, our government is getting too big. Our government is getting too powerful. Our government is beginning to overstep its these bright line limitations that we've put out there to try to keep it in its own lane, and it's starting to step on the rights and the privileges that we as individuals should have. So we have to be very much cognizant of that and be able to say, wait a minute, no, you don't belong over here, government. You've grown too big for your britches, and we're going to rein you back in. Democracy suffers when the government gets to the point where it's outside where it's supposed to be acting and starts infringing on our rights as individuals. And we see, right, this kind of churn in our society right now about concerns about this. And while that's upsetting in the sense that it's bringing a lot of discord, which is kind of an interesting, and now that I think about the name of that, it's discord, but its idea is to encourage communication. Anyway, as it's bringing discord into our society, it's bringing debate, right? If it's bringing some kind of anxiety because of what's going on, then that's good because that means we're paying attention, but it's bad because it means some people are thinking the government's where it doesn't belong. So that's good. So, Andrew, does that mean you're good through Discord or you're back through the Blackboard?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Come on. Can you hear me? I'm on the computer.
All right, so that's non-tyranny. It's we need to keep our government in a state of non-tyranny, right? Not being able to lord over us or control us. I could not hear you, Andrew, but I can see your chat. I'm not in Discord, so I won't be hearing what's going on in Discord. So apparently those that are there can hear it. I'm still on the Blackboard system. Okay. Weird. So yeah, that it is weird. I'm not hearing you at all. I concur at the moment. How many of y'all have used Zoom, by the way, or could use Zoom? I haven't tried it as far as a class situation yet, but if we keep having mistakes here. I've got access to Zoom, and I'll go over maybe and practice with that and make sure I can.
Zoom and Discord
okay.
work really.
Yeah, I don't have WebEx and haven't used WebEx. But if this turns into a consistent problem, I may put out the instructions to join over in Zoom. I can't hear you, but I can see your text. I can see your chat messages. All right, so we're going to move on to participation, right? Another threat to democracy. I am watching your chats over here, but I'm not going to comment on all of them. I'm going to try and do a little more talking here, lecture. Obviously, if the government gets to a point where it starts deciding who gets to participate and who doesn't, regardless of which government we're talking about, we've got a problem, right? Participation is kind of the base level of agreement for democracy to happen. And so at the point where you start losing participation, you've got a de facto situation of tyranny. And so we've got to be really careful that everybody still gets, that's supposed to have a part, can play a part, right? So I don't think anybody's going to have a problem seeing how participation or a lack thereof would be a threat to good democracy. Here's probably our biggest current threat to democracy in Texas and anywhere for that matter, is that democracy needs deliberation. Democracy needs that enlightened understanding. We have to be able to talk to one another. And that's a real challenge for us because we tend as humans to group up and then to yell at out-group people while we agree with our discussions with in-group people. Right? It's so easy to become we get into a situation where you are defining us versus them. And once you do that, deliberation quite often dies, right? Because deliberation requires that the folks that are in discussion actually listen and actually think about the issues that other people are bringing up, and how those issues are impacting them. Not just say, and we've heard this a good bit in the last few years, right? People say, look, elections have consequences. While that's a true statement, that's a very damaging statement to deliberation and democracy, because it means, when I say that elections have consequences, it means I'm going to ignore you now. We've got our little majority over here, whatever, whether it's Republican or Democrat or whatever, and we're going to do what we want to do. And you're just going to have to deal with it because we're in the majority right now, right? We won the election, and here are the consequences that you losers have to put up with. Again, the mechanics of democracy, the majority rule, that's a true statement for a lot of policy. But it's a very damaging statement for preserving a democratic system, right? We have to get people in the majority and people in the minority to not just talk at each other, but to talk with each other, and that's deliberation. To consider what you're doing to other groups and other people. people, to be a little empathic, right? Empathetic. And this is currently a serious challenge for us right now. We've become so focused on our political tribes instead of political parties, our political tribes, and who's in them and who's not in them as a way of discerning whether we agree with somebody or not, that it's a real problem. And the longer we yell at each other and don't listen, the worse it's going to be. Okay, so I'm sorry, Andrew, that you're still having issues. So do we meet these four conditions? The answer is somewhere on the range of a little bit to a lot, but it's not great. And so we have some problems, and I think I've covered them as we went through the four. I used to do IT. I don't know if it's going to matter with Andrew because he can't hear me probably. I used to do IT support, and the IT crowd answer is the right answer most of the time, right? Have you rebooted it? Okay, and hopefully, Lauren, you're correct in the recording that y'all are seeing it is working, and it'll be posted later, and it'll be something that Andrew can focus on. Yeah, at some point the frustration is just too much. I certainly understand. Okay, so let's bring all this democracy talk now and start talking about the ideas, some of these ideas in Texas. And to do that, first we need to understand that Texas, while it's probably not as unique as Texans think it is, we do certainly think that as Texans we're unique. And if you look at what we as Texans tend to say about ourselves and what we tend to believe about ourselves, we are unique. And that's where this idea of the Texas Creed comes from. The Texas Creed is a set of ideas that when we ask Texans about what it means to be a Texan and what it means to be democratic and have a government in Texas, this is what Texans tell us, right? They tell us that there are basically five big ideas that come into play or so about Texas. And that these are different than that you were in other places. And I find this to generally be a true argument when you're talking about Texas as a whole, and you talk about how Texans talk about Texas. Individually, it obviously varies a lot. The first thing here that we have here is that there is a incredibly strong focus on the rights that individuals have as individuals in Texas. Now, as Americans, we've always had this idea of individual rights, but in Texas, it seems to take on a little bit of an extra dimension. It seems to be a little more deeply ingrained. And I think a lot of that goes back to a historical experience with the frontier in Texas and the idea that as an individual, you have to be responsible for yourself, right? It was, if you go back into the 1800s, you couldn't do well in Texas if you couldn't protect yourself and protect your own property. You were expected as an individual to go out and to truly go out in the world and make a place for yourself. And those historical experiences have been idealized, right? And have been tied to this notion of being a Texan to a much stronger degree, I think, than it is to being an American. Not that it's not there, but I think it's stronger in Texas. And that's why I say it's the concept of individuals having rights is sacred in Texas, right? It takes on this extra dimension. Um, and so when we have discussions about what individuals should be able to do in society and what reach government should have in regulating individuals' lives in Texas, that's narrow, right? That's a very small area. Texans will argue sun up to sundown that, right, small government, while evil, is somewhat necessary and we should have a little bit of it, right? And if you go to other places in the country, the perspective on what government's role is and how much it should be coming into play with people is much more expanded than it is here in Texas. And that stems out of this idea that the rights individuals have are prior to government, are more deeply ingrained than ideas of democracy, and that individualism runs deep and true in us. Now, I think, right, a lot of that is overstated, but it's still stronger in Texas than I've seen it in other places that I've lived. And those of you that have lived outside of Texas may have seen that as well. So that, I think, you can never be wrong when you keep that in mind about what it means to be Texan and how that it flows over into what we think the government's role is. When you set that as a baseline expectation that individuals have sacred rights, one of the first things that comes out of that is that all government that's going to come about later is government that's going to be built by individuals agreeing to build it. And so government exercising political power, right, exercise that at the discretion of the individuals, right? We as a people say we're going to have a government and we're going to give that government some power. And so you have to recognize that the political power of government is lent to it, it's allowed to borrow that power from individuals. And in that sense, we don't give up all of our power, we give up some of it to let government operate. And the fact that we don't give it all up ensures that government is supposed to be limited. And we write that into our constitutions. Our legislation that comes about after the fact is supposed to be limited by it. And we as a people always reserve the right to step back in and limit government more if we feel we need to. Right? So, right, individuals have rights that belong to them because they're individuals. They lend some of the power that comes from those rights to an organization called the government and give it political power. That political power allows the government to operate, but it operates in a small spectrum in a limited fashion. And the people are supposed to have control over it and the ability to restrict it and rescind that power as they see fit. Continuing on that idea is the idea that we can limit government more and we can participate in government more when it's not government over there, but it's government here. And so generally Texans prefer local government to higher levels of government, say county or state or certainly national. And that's because it keeps the focus on the individual, right? Small local governments, we can know everybody that's involved in our local government. We can know a good portion of the people that live in our city and are participating in discussions with our government, going to city councils and things like that. And so, right, this major focus on the individual and power from the individual bleeds over into not only what government can do, but the kind of government we tend to prefer. Now, we espouse this idea that we want local government because we will participate and we can control it better as opposed to larger government. And as a matter of course, the Republican Party always plays up the idea of small government, which means small state government, more focus at the county or the local level. Right, that's a consistent plank in the Republican Party in Texas, playing off of this local government perspective. And it's probably just not true when you look at it in action, right? We actually, as voters, participate more at the national level than we do at the state level. And we participate more at the state level than we do the county level. And we participate more at the county level than the local level. So the government that's easiest for us to impact, that's easiest for us to play a part in, our city councils, our local governments, are the ones that we ignore the most. So we've got a preference in theory for local government, but our practice shows something different, right? So that's, the Texas Creed, right, is developed out of the perspectives of Texans talking about these things. And Texans will continually say they prefer local government to higher government, but their actions show that while that may be the way they feel, that's not the way they act. The next kind of plank in this is that we tend to think that government is not that complex and making decisions for groups is not that hard. And therefore, the exercise of common sense is all that's truly necessary to make governmental decisions. When you hold that perspective, it's much easier to then believe in the fact that the majority is going to make wise decisions more often than the minority. Right? We put a value on decisions made by the majority, right? There's, 36 of us in class and we take a vote, right? And 24 of us want to do something and 12 don't. And we're a majority rule kind of situation maybe. And we're going, well, I'm in the minority. I think what I think is correct, but man, 2/3 of the people think opposite of me. Maybe I'm wrong. So let's go with it, right? I mean, we'll see the minority, right, convince themselves to go with the majority quite often because of this underlying idea that if more people think one thing, that's probably correct. And our experience shows us that that's somewhat true, right? The majority does make good decisions or workable decisions, at least most of the time. But we also see big majorities that make huge mistakes. And we see minorities that were right. And the other part of this kind of idea that common sense can play into a majority and make good decisions, the other part of this that gets ignored quite often is how complex the decision is, right? We see a lot of people right now in the pandemic thinking that they can be responsible enough to stay healthy and not infect other people, and they don't need the government giving them a policy about how they need to act in public. And questioning, right, the experts in communicable health diseases telling us to wear masks, right, and to social distance. Now, it's not that they necessarily disbelieve that, but they think that they are smart enough or wise enough that they can manage it on their own and not just follow the rule all the time. We like to think that of ourselves, and we like to think that of our neighbors. But what we see when we look around the world is that those governments that don't have to be concerned about liberties and rights and have forced their population to wear masks in a much more stringent fashion have a much better COVID success plan in place working than we do. And so, right, that makes you have to sit down and think a little bit. If we had followed, right, the expert opinions and done the harder thing, would we be doing better in the COVID responses, pandemic response in the US than we are? the facts seem to show us that majority here in Texas that are trying to say we should keep our economy open and running, and we should keep we should be able to determine when we wear a mask and how we wear a mask and what size group we participate in. We're not doing a great job as far as controlling the pandemic. We're doing we're looking after protecting our freedoms and our liberties, and that's important too. I'm not going to try to dismiss that, right? But we're not hitting a good balance in the sense of being able to control the pandemic with behavior. Now, luckily, we've got vaccines that are rolling out, and the vaccination, if it works, will do this for us, right? It'll bring this to a stop. But our behavior doesn't seem to be being as effective as we thought we could make it. Yeah, a lot of people think that, Ruben, and I think that there's probably some truth to it, right? We see some countries that lock down hard and locked down quick, and they took a big economic hit, right? But they also got in front of the virus. And we didn't do that. And if we were to have put that to a vote, I think we would have voted the same way that we're acting, right? Right now, I think we've, our governmental response, both at the national and state level, has been in line with what the majority kind of wants to do. And in that sense, we're getting the response that we've chosen. And you know, it's difficult, right? And so I'm hoping that you know, we get we keep getting a good distribution of the vaccine, and that all of us that want to take it will take it as quickly as we can, and that'll help us out. The point I'm trying to make here is that quite often, we think the majority is right because of the majority, and we think that exercising common sense is all that's truly necessary for good policy. And that's not always the case, and it is a lot of the time, right? So it's not like it's wrong-headed, right? But it just doesn't work all the time. And Texas believes that, right? Texas as a whole is right there following common sense and individual perspective, and then looking to the larger group to make a good decision. All of this rolls up to generally Texans prefer more expansive definitions of individual behavior and more restrictive definitions of government. And we want small government, we want less government, we want more liberty, right? If you're talking to a Texan and you assume those things there, you're probably right, right? And so all of that impacts the government that we expect to have. All of that impacts what we as individuals expect to be able to do. And so that's, you know, goes a large extent into what it means to be Texan and how we look at the Texas government, what the Texas government's going to be involved in. Lauren, there's a lot of truth to that, isn't there? That we left it up to private business to decide how they were going to enforce mask wearing. And of course, that's a conflicted situation because private business, service industry and otherwise, right, are open to make a profit and to, you know, to sell things and service and to then put limitations on how their customers can come in and engage with them is not necessarily good for business. And so it's a difficult position to put our service industry or our business industry in to say, police yourself, right? And they're like, am I going to be following the COVID guidelines hardcore, or am I going to try to make sure that I'm turning a profit and keeping my employees here and selling my product? It's not. All right. Any questions about what we've talked about so far before we move on, or before I call it a day? One thing I want to bring to your attention is the in Blackboard is the link to the political compass. Let me see if I can't jump over there and share that screen. So what I'm talking about is right here. Right, make sure y'all are seeing that. Yes, you are. Right, the political compass. If you take this and then you go to this website, Political Compass. Right. Let's see if I can get you that one. We'll stop sharing that screen and share this screen now. Right, here's the Political Compass page. Yeah, y'all are seeing that. The Political Compass right here is the Take the Test button. This is a online quiz in a sense where it's going to ask you lots of questions about policy. I would like you to take this. When you get done, it's going to give you a result. That result is going to give you a square that looks like this, and your dot is going to be placed on here somewhere, showing where you are in the political ideological spectrum, right? I want you to right click on this picture and save it, right? You'll save it somewhere, right? And you'll save it as a, that's not letting me see the actual picture. That's giving me the whole page. But when you get a result, this will be an image. And you can save that image as a PNG file or a JPEG file. I'd like you to save that image to your desktop, your laptop, whatever you're using, and then upload it, right? Come back into the system. Oh. And upload that by clicking here and browse, select your file and submit it. This is an extra credit opportunity. The deadline is, as you can see, right, is February 5th. So go out there, do that. I do not care what the result you get is. I want you to learn where you are on the ideological spectrum, and this is a good kind of quiz to step you through that. And if you'll do that and learn a little bit about how to label yourself politically as, an authoritarian or left on the left or the right or libertarian, right? If you'll do that, that'll help understand where you actually are based on your policy preferences, not based on the group that you've associated with growing up. Sometimes those correspond, sometimes they don't. So you got to the 5th to do this. I'll try to remember to mention this next time as well. And submit that and get some extra credit. Let's see. Yes, so Samantha is Gandhi, right? That's excellent. So submit that. And you can look around on there. It gives other folks, either politicians or other people that we know, like Gandhi, right, where they fit on it. So do that and submit it before the 5th, and I'll try to remember to mention this on Thursday as well. Have a good day, y'all.